Thank you very much for being so nice. Okay, so let's start. So the other day I was going to my weekly therapist meeting. And I don't know about you, but that makes me very nervous. Very nervous. My hands were shaking as I got closer and closer to the entrance of their office. I was genuinely scared about confronting my feelings. And if you're anything like me, you would love to put them into words, but expressions like I'm okay or I feel lonely don't quite communicate the mess that is our feelings. But in I went. I was scared, but still I said hello in a very weak way. And I sat in the couch in front of me. The reason that I wasn't very comfortable is that sometimes it is harder to connect with someone because they're not like you. And sometimes, as I was hearing my therapist talk to me, I would feel that I couldn't really connect with them or that their words didn't really get to me because I would have liked it if they were more like me. What if my therapist instead was she, maybe they had longer hair, and understood what it was like to grow up in a very religious background as a queer person in Latin America. Anyway, all those questions came to my head, and I was very, very scared, and there was this invisible wall being created between me and my therapist. And I've been at UWCDilijan for more than a year. That wall is there every day. When I talk to my friends, I always feel that there are certain topics that I just can't connect with them with. But that also happened back home. Talking to people from different neighborhoods, people from different regions, I always feel like we were a bit too different for me to truly connect with them and to truly find common ground. But anyway, I kept talking to my therapist that day. And my brain went to different directions, thinking what it would be like in different occasions, maybe if I was in Colombia and not Armenia. But as I was getting too distracted, they said something very interesting that caught my attention. As I was telling them that sometimes when I feel a certain way, my mom tells me this saying, and it makes me feel better, they laughed and said, oh, we have a similar one where I come from. And for some reason, that felt comforting. It felt powerful, and I felt like the invisible wall between us had started to crumble even the slightest bit. And I remember that also happened back home, that even if we were from different neighborhoods or different regions, we found common ground through words. Maybe it was because we used similar filler words, or maybe it was because the songs we danced to had similar lyrics or the similar language. But anyway, I could understand that sometimes we can find similarities in those smallest moments and truly build a connection. So, because of that little conversation, I was very inspired, and I decided to carry out a little experiment. It was simple. I would spam the people around me, and I would ask them for both through messages and in real life, and I would ask them for a saying in their language that they loved. But there was a second part to it, and it was to find a similar saying in Spanish. I really wanted to find a connection because that day I felt connected, and I wanted to see if that was maybe just a one-time thing or maybe it was a real connection. And so it seemed like a cool but crazy idea, and I was like, maybe there wouldn't be anything coming out of it, but I still tried because that conversation gave me hope. And so I did. I sent out a Google form to the people in the school, and I was so happy and surprised when I saw responses in many different languages, in Uzbek, in Tagalog, in Spanish, Armenian, Russian, and as I talked to people around me, I also got answers in French, Dutch, Romanian, and Mandarin. So, after that, came the hard part. But I remember that I like to keep note of good sentences wherever I hear them, so instead of becoming a crazy and complicated idea, it became simple, and this is what I found. So, these are two phrases in two different languages. The first one, I think we can all, most of us understand, it's pretty self-explanatory. But the second one, acá había regalado, no se le mira el diente, is a saying in Spanish that translated to English would be something like, one shouldn't look at the teeth of a gifted horse. And even if both of these phrases use different body parts and a different action or verb, both of them come down to the same thing, being grateful. This is another example. This one, there's no Spanish sentence because I really couldn't find it, but it's still a similar intention. The first one is a proverb in Chinese that translates to silence is gold, and the second one is a phrase in Romanian that translates to if you had kept quiet, you would have remained a philosopher. These are two very different sayings, but they find an intersection in the idea that in life, one must be cautious with one's words. Now, this example was very important for me because sometimes, in talking to my friends, I realized about this, that we tend to translate sayings, so that kind of made my job a bit harder. But the fact that two different cultures found an intersection and had similar principles just reminded me that we're not that different and that we're ultimately all human. Even if complicated, I was able to find a bit of common ground and I felt like a winner. Because sayings and proverbs ultimately communicate and hold the principles that our societies and our families are based on. And the fact that they are similar just made me feel happy. And so it also made me realize why in a place with people from more than 80 different countries, I feel safe and sometimes understood. And so, understanding that our differences are not that much, I joined a project that has changed the way I see myself and I perceive people. Peace Pen Pal was an initiative that was started in a different UWC, and it mainly consisted of connecting students from different countries and cultures through letters, like a pen pal kind of thing. And it was mainly aimed at spreading multicultural understanding and peace and ideas of understanding each other. And so I joined. But me, instead of being part of the exchange of the letters, I would be a witness. So I, alongside the leader and organizers of the cast, we would be a bridge between two cultures, between two completely different worlds, and we were the ones in charge of bringing up cool and interesting prompts for conversation. As we started the letter exchanges in 2021, the team and I were able to connect people from my home country, Colombia, with Armenian students. And I felt that was beautiful. As I read their letters and I read their passion with which they navigated their hobbies and how they shared similar struggles with learning a new language, I realized that there is not much difference and that words truly communicate and are truly the thing that unite us all. As they included their names and their favorite parks, singers, and cities, I realized that they were very similar, that they had very similar misspellings in English, and that they all held the same hope and innocence that people in Colombia and people in many different parts of the world tend to have. But I believe that it is our duty to not only remember words like mantras, but also write them down to the content of our hearts. I'm a very hopeful person, and I'm also a big daydreamer. And I frequently find solace in other people's words. But as I've grown older and more confident, I've learned to find my words as my own safe haven. We are also the new generations, and of course we must know our history and read to be able to not make the same mistakes, but we're also the ones in charge of writing our future, writing down our ideas, and truly making them into our reality. So, in hopes of making and helping other people make words their safe haven, I started the Creative Writing Cast, and it was a bit complicated at first. I was terrified every time I stepped into that room because the people that joined me were amazing. I didn't feel like an authority, I didn't feel like anybody to give out advice, but I still did so, of course very scared. But over time, I realized that people that joined me were people that were in the same journey as me. They were trying to build or remodel the home we call our words. And so, as time went by, it became clear that every time I read something that I wrote, I got to know myself more. And every time they read it out loud, I got to know them way better. At times, I felt selfish writing in silence because I really didn't know what to do. But when the hour we had ended, I felt like we had truly connected, and that truly impacted me in ways that only words can. So I realized that all it took is willingness, because we're all just a few words away from connecting with each other and understanding each other. A few words and minutes from listening and reading to truly understanding someone else's context. And in the search of understanding myself, Colombian history, and the struggles my country has gone through, I found this. This is Luz de la Noche, which in English translates to Nightlight. It is a radio series that first came out in 2021, and it is an anthology of the stories of people that were affected by the armed conflict in Colombia. For a little bit of context, and maybe you don't know, the armed conflict in Colombia started in the 20th century and lasted for more than 50 years. It was one of the longest civil wars until there was resolution found in 2016. And when these peace agreements were being made, both the government and the counterpart in the discussion came up with the idea that there were three main pillars they had to achieve. And those were justice, truth, and reparations. And in the search for the second one was created the Commission of Truth. This Commission of Truth would be in charge of finding out what truly happened, would be in charge of listening to both victims and perpetrators, and would be in charge of spreading the stories of the victims that went through all of this. So they created this podcast to highlight diversity of my country, Colombia. they created this podcast to showcase how conflict and war affected and can affect anybody in the country. So as a Colombian, I felt responsible for listening to these stories and sharing them with as many people as I can, what I'm doing today. If you understand Spanish, I recommend giving it a listen. As a writer, I could really appreciate the raw emotions, the words they use communicated, and the beauty of storytelling. But as a human, I was moved like I'd never had been before. I listened intently to the fate many Colombians went through and lived, and I made sure to learn and pay attention to truly bring about change in my country. I wanted to find peaceful change, whether that be through finding a better education by taking part in an NGO, or just voting more consciously and voting for humane politics. This project was government-backed and had the support of the European Union. It is a beautiful masterpiece that uses our senses to bring us back to the places and times in which tragedy occurred. And it made me realize that people care and should care about stories, that words are as important as everything in our society, and that their honesty is what can bring about true change, a true change of mindset and actions. Because I used to believe that in times of conflict, there wasn't much people like me could do. I couldn't join the army or be able to support people, but all I had were my words. And because of this project, and because of my history with words, I realized that there is something we can do, and that is spread awareness. This initiative is so beautiful, and it was able to reach out to millions of people and shorten the gap between our differences. And it supported the process through which Colombia wanted to find a more peaceful society. I have come across words in many instances in my life. I have welcomed them and birthed them. I have used them for my advantage and for others' advantage. But one thing I can say, no matter what their purpose is that they're beautiful. They carry our culture, our history, and our experiences. And in true spirit of fight or flight, it's always good to come back to our roots and stick to the principles that raised us. It's always okay to take a step back, to fly home, just so that as long as you can find the strength and confidence to be able to fight for what you want. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.